So today we are going to talk about mindfulness, about a mental factor, which in the original Buddha's teaching has got a very predominant, important position, important place. Lots of emphasis on this particular feature. Because it seems that in the cooperation with many another wholesome factors, the mindfulness is the leading faculty which triggers the healing process, the process toward liberation, and in its culmination even triggering the enlightenment. So let's be clear that in the old scriptures, old original Buddhist scriptures, mindfulness, the sati, is appearing on so many places. It is one of the 5 mental faculties, the indriyas. It is one of the spiritual powers, the balas. It is one of the 7 factors of enlightenment, the bojjhangas, and it is the first one there, named as the initial first factor. And also it is in the Eightfold Noble Path as the link number 7, Sama Sati, the path towards liberation. So clearly very important position in the original scriptures. And there is perhaps even one reason more to talk about it in quite some detail, because in the recent years, the training of mindfulness is sometimes taken out of the spiritual framework of the original teaching and finding applications in modern psychology and therapy. I remember in the place I was living before, in a monastery, in a Swiss monastery, there was a secretary one time, a young girl, and she was actually working on a thesis for the university about mindfulness and its application in modern psychology. And of course we remember the remarkable pioneer work of John Kabat-Zinn, introducing mindfulness to the clinical applications, to the patients with chronic pain, with depression or with addiction, and achieving remarkable results there. So, and in the recent time, even getting some news from the side of neuroscience that the application of mindfulness to the life can rewire the brain. I would be somehow careful with that kind of discovery, but of course that's science. They must have some indications definitely for that. For me, this kind of looking at the mind in the brain, I think this is mistaken locality to look for the mind. For me, the brain, at the best, it's the receiver of mind or receiver of consciousness. This old paradigm or the old kind of idea that consciousness and mind is created in the brain or by the brain, I think it is now so evident that it is not that case, that the brain is in the best case a receiver of consciousness. And I would even say that brain is rather an interface for the mind, connecting the sensory periphery, the eyes, the ear, the tongue, the body, the smelling, and the thinking, kind of an interface which allows the mind to get data from this worldly dimension of existence. And in my understanding, the mind can very well detach from brain and go its own ways to another dimensions, or even partially staying in this dimension but not using the sensory equipment of the material body. So back to our topic. In the old scriptures, which we have in the original scriptures, written record, and mindfulness is the original expression is sati, usually appearing in some connections as sati sampajanya, sati panya. And let's be clear that sati is always working together with a whole range of another wholesome factors. It is not appearing as a pure only that factor, but the sati seems to be most responsible for the healing process. It triggers the development towards freedom. So in this reflection, in this talk, I would have especially two objectives, main objectives, to reflect about the way the mindfulness is healing and bringing all this positive developments. That would be one important area to make us clear what is the Buddha's medicine he's offering to the humanity. And the other objective is still remaining, it's much better, but still remaining some confusion about the application and areas of mindfulness in our life, in our Dharma life. So trying to clarify eventually existing confusions. So going first to the area how the mindfulness works. You know, this bringing the mind towards the actuality as it is taking place, getting this presence of mind, directing the mind towards the things which we are doing right now, how this should make any improvement and even trigger very important purification process culminating in enlightenment. So to help us to understand it, let me mention one of the very high insights along the practice of vipassana meditation, insight meditation. It is called yatha bhuta. The insight is to see the things as they really are. Meaning seeing the truth. This gives us the understanding how mindfulness is actually correcting and healing, really, by letting the truth come into our life more and more. And the psychology has correctly noticed that this process of this kind of a correction is basically identical with the mental health and improvement of quality of life. Bringing the life in alignment with the truth. Which, when we roll it back, means that normally the humanity, that we are living in lies and distortions and delusions, illusions, fantasies, projections, distortions of Krishnamurti actually expressed this so beautifully. He said, it is not our wish or our effort to become free, it is the truth which liberates. So, to understand the working of this Buddha's medicine offered to the humanity, not so difficult, because the truth is available every moment. Even when we are not in the perfect condition, the truth is always available, how the things really are. This kind of discovery. The perfection, as we normally understand it, is not always available. That's what we know quite good. But the truth can be discovered any moment, theoretically. Practically, there are all these defilements of our perception of our mind, which are distorting our living, our existence. So actually the truth is not so easily available, and it is usually quite an adventurous process to come to terms with the truth as it is. And it is not only the conventional truth, it goes much further than that. Now, talking also about the different possibilities of translation, the original term sati or samasati into foreign language, into Western languages, English and others. Mindfulness, very, very nice actually translation in English. German language has Achtsamkeit, Gewahrsein, Aufmerksamkeit. Achtsamkeit is not so very good, that means attentiveness only. Attentiveness is too general. Mindfulness in the Buddhist understanding is a very specific kind of attentiveness. It is rather a kind of watchfulness, I would say. A kind of supervision. The characteristic of supervision is it is not soaked and submerged in the story itself. Supervision is always something which is staying over the story, whatever it may be. So the supervision is a very good actually rendering for the original sati. If we look etymologically, the original meaning is something like to remember, to keep in mind, remembering. When I first came across this original meaning of the word, I was quite confused, because in my practice I was doing exactly the opposite, to come free of these endless memories and kind of influences from the past, which is coming into your meditation quite often. And my understanding of practice was to be here and now. So to understand how was it remembering. It took few years until I found I think very good understanding how sati actually can be well taken in that original sense. Like for all of us who came to the Buddha's teaching in such a stormy way, like me, many of my friends, Dharma friends, actually experienced the same. Encountering the Buddha's teaching in such a steep and instant kind of opening, which changed completely the life. in my case, it was that strong and that sudden, when I found something which I was looking for the whole life, and suddenly it was here, answering all my questions at one stroke, giving clarity, giving clear direction to my life, giving clear aim to my life, introducing new scale of values. I made it the first priority of my life at that day and night. But of course, later you go back to your normal life, and all these forces of social living and family living and professional living, this is 40 years now back. And I was a layman, and of course these old patterns of behavior will come back here and there. And that's the moment to remember. To remember what you decided for. To make the Dharma the first priority of your life. And to remember as often as necessary until it becomes a kind of an established mindfulness. So in this sense, sati as a remembering makes a beautiful meaning, because it is not limiting the mindfulness application to a particular area of our life, but it is addressing the whole of our life as the original teaching of Buddha really does. It is a complex transformation of the whole of our life. So with this understanding, with this initial understanding of the path, I was so well served by the Buddha's teaching. My beginning was a really blessed one. And later on, I came across, of course, with the different translations of the sati. First time encountering the English mindfulness. Of course, that for a non-English speaker gives a wonderful idea, the fullness of mind, not deformed, not distracted, but full open. Very good image I was getting from that rendering. only later on I find out that for English speakers the mindfulness is completely normal expression or normal word, meaning just heedfulness. General. Even that is quite a nice rendering actually of sati. Wide enough, not too wide, not narrow. If you render it as a presence of mind, this is not sufficient. Not every presence of mind is really wholesome. Thinking when you watch television, a football match, your concentration and mindfulness is 100%, I'm sure, if you are a fan of football. Absorbed in especially the mistakes of the counter team. Noticing every little happening in that quick game. It is not wholesome, clearly not. It's in the best way it is neutral. So I will mention now one story to clarify why I am bringing this second objective, clarifying confusion. It happened about 35 years ago when we started the first Dhamma group in Bern in Switzerland. And we would we would come together every week and sit for 1 hour. Then we would drink tea and discuss some Dhamma-related topics, or Dhamma-less related topics, as the life of these groups usually looks like. I remember one of the memorable discussions at that time. That was the beginning, really. And our understanding mostly was that Buddha's teaching means this super intensive practice of insight meditation. That was somehow the idea. But one evening we got also the Professor Henking. He was a respected member of our group, and one particular time he was joining. And he came with the idea that mindfulness, especially mindfulness, should be applied to the everyday situation as well. Today it is evidently so, and everybody knows about that, but 35 years ago that was quite some new discovery. And Professor Henking said, he brought an example: when I write a letter, I should do it mindfully. That was the time without internet, so writing letters a lot. And I remember my reaction, coming, what? This is impossible. You see? And at the end, when I was bringing my argumentation, correct from my side, finally we could agree, we found some common ground, that at least the signature at the end of the letter can be put mindfully. So just indicating there is some kind of misunderstandings probably still hanging around about these things. The second example I can mention is a sign in one of the meditation centers, and that is a meditation center devoted predominantly for the insight meditation, insight intensive practice. And on the sign was, allow whatever arises. And the great Buddhist American scholar Bhikkhu Bodhi, very respected person in the area of the original scriptures, he countered with the quotation from the suttas when the Buddha is teaching the monks. Here a monk doesn't tolerate an arisen thoughts of sensual desire, of ill will, of cruelty, or any other arisen unwholesome state, but abandons it, eliminates it, and completely dispels it. This is the advice of Buddha. So now, step by step, slowly coming to the other objective of this talking, of this reflection. Applying mindfulness correctly in the line of the original teaching of Buddha. And then there are evidently some deficiencies in that area, not understanding it always properly. And for the purpose of this clarification, let me divide our life, our Dharma life, into 3 different areas in which the mindfulness should be applied, but in an appropriate way, in a slightly different way. But let me say already now that all the 3 areas are equally important, not to make one more important than the other. That's the usual mistake the Western culture is doing chronically. And starting with the first area of mindfulness, that's the area of our everyday life as it really is. With all these social contacts, with the family lives, with the professional lives, with the difficulties how to pay the mortgage back, with the problems the children are bringing home from the school, with our personal problems with the colleagues or with the neighbors or the partner, or the normal lives when we are planning the next holidays and all that. Let's be clear that this is the largest area of our normal everyday life. And of course, the Buddha's teaching and the application of mindfulness to this area of our existence is so important, because exactly here the application of mindfulness can bring instant improvement. The others, the intensive meditation and this kind, usually it takes time, but this one is instantaneous. Each of these three areas also has a kind of simile in the old text, so that we can see how Buddha is exactly meaning it. The simile, the parable for application of mind in our everyday life, is the gate watcher, the guard in the entry. What is the task of the man in the entry? To allow all the invited guests inside and welcome them, and to keep away all the uninvited. And we probably instinctively understand what is meant by that. The guardian, that's the mindfulness itself. And this mindfulness in our everyday life should distinguish between that what is wholesome and that what is not wholesome. And we should invite and develop these things which are wholesome, and we should keep away those things which are unwholesome, exactly as it was the quotation Bhikkhu Bodhi brought from the scriptures. So this is the area number one, and it implies to check the input which is coming from the five senses. And of course, if it is tainted by greed or hatred, that's definitely something we should apply a gentle kind of restraint, sensual restraint, the meaningful one. And even more, this area of mindfulness is watching over the atmosphere of our mind, if it is wholesome or unwholesome. And evidently the negative emotions should not be developed and should be replaced by positive emotions. Also, the contents of our thoughts, the thoughts connected with cruelty or lust or hatred, definitely something which is not beneficial, and it makes not our life better. But even to keep eye open over our motivation and reactions, it's a large area, and it needs quite some training, that this kind of mindfulness will be a part of our living, established standard of our living. And this is what the Western people usually don't develop sufficiently. So here the hallmark of this mindfulness is the sensitivity towards what's beneficial and what is damaging, what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. So application of mindfulness in this area is strictly dualistic, distinguishing between good and bad, between wholesome and unwholesome. And let's be clear that we will know what is wholesome and what is unwholesome on account of knowing the Buddha's teaching, knowing how the karma works, which means to have the right view. So the mindfulness should be paired with the right view. Now, coming to the second area of applying my Dharma or mindfulness, and it is the area already a little bit narrower. The social life belongs to it only partially, and it is concerning rather our living situation when we are doing things repeatedly, cleaning our house, the chores, cooking, or walking the stairs up, washing our hands, and the instruction is be here now with the things as they are. Come down from the mental bubbles and from the foggy inner monologue, and come here, be with the things wholeheartedly as they are. And this kind of mindfulness is, as I already mentioned, used in the psychotherapy, and it is already a level of Dharma which is the normal standard in the monasteries as they normally functions. It has the mindfulness of this type, which is already a little bit more specific. In the first area, it is still mindfulness, completely conceptual thoughts going on. Here in the second area, the thoughts still exist, of course, the wholesome thoughts, usually called yoniso manasikara, wisely reflecting about the things that belongs to the second area, clearly helping us to tune the mind correctly, to create the proper attitude towards the events of our life. This mindfulness already has some quality of harmonizing. It has even the slight quality of forgiveness, because it is learning us to look at the things from a little bit bigger picture. We start to perceive the situations from another people's direction also. Be more sensitive towards the people around, how they experience this or that. And from this kind of slight detachment from this ego cage, we are starting also to experience some joy, and we start sometimes also to little bit smile about our problems. Mindfulness here already starts to keep the overview, overlooking, not being drowned in the stories of the life, and rather to attend to the daily activities with this openness and freedom. Now, the simile from the scriptures is quite a strong one, to put it moderate way. It is the situation describing a person in the olden days, India, carrying a bowl full of oil on his or her head, and the bowl is filled to the brim. And the task is to cross the Asian marketplace. With many places here, many places here, many places here, many places there, and people running everywhere. And here is one friend, and there is somebody I know. And behind this person is a soldier with a sword. And when one drop of the oil is spilled, he will cut the head away. So the olden days similes are sometimes quite brutal, but indicating the urgency of application of mindfulness, not to split away of this uninterrupted kind of level of mind necessary to open up the healing starting taking place. Today we are using rather more friendly similes. We can tell the same. For example, there are still people shaving with razor knife. A little bit wrong angle and a little bit wrong direction makes some bloody mess. So at the beginning, this mindfulness is extreme. Later on, these people just, scratching the beard away, even singing and listening to radio. So that would be the mastery, how far the mindfulness should be established in our life in this second area, that it becomes fluent, uninterrupted. I am usually bringing the picture of a young mother carrying her baby on the body in a kind of a bag, and still doing the daily chores and daily activities, answering the phone. But watch the mother when she goes through the door, how mindfully she opens, she enters, and she closes the door. This is type of mindfulness, fluent, connected with loving kindness. Therefore I like this simile so, to let the positivity in during this practice. So important, especially for the Western people. So that's the category number 2. Applying mindfulness here and now. About this type of mindfulness, I found a very nice description from Diana Winston. Mindfulness is paying attention to present moment experiences with openness, curiosity, and willingness to be with what is. Quite nice. For this second area of practice, very nicely put, with curiosity, because here the mindfulness also starts to discover the things we are always stolpering over. This repressed material, psychological material, where the mind always avoiding this topics or things because it's painful. And bringing to mindfulness to this area means, to open it and to integrate these parts of ourselves, of our psyche. So understand also correctly that the application of mindfulness sometimes is quite difficult task to do when it starts to tackle these areas, difficult areas of our life. Usually quite some resistance will come from the area of our ego, because the ego lives in these fantasies and self-disparaging ideas and all these clouds of mind. That's the area the ego is living. And when we are systematically applying mindfulness in this way, of course, the ego is feeling it is coming to the collar already. So throwing 1,000 reasonable arguments to stop that kind of training. It's useless and meaningless and wasting your time. So it is not always easy. That's the message. And you need some clear decision and stamina to really practice even through the difficult passages of the practice. Fortunately, the difficult practice is usually balanced with the beauty of the new discoveries of freedom. Now, Coming to the third area of applying mindfulness. And this is the area when we devote quite some time for a very intensive and systematic development of insight meditation, usually in form of a retreat. When we are 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 months in a continuous development of the insight meditation, deepening the whole range of wholesome factors. But again, the mindfulness is very probably the predominant one. But here, the hallmark of this training, advanced training, especially in the advanced stages, is the non-identification with the experience itself. You know, the first insight along the path of insight is called Namarupa Parichida Jnana, which means, sometimes I joke a little bit and call it the triality. You know, in the beginning, it is just the object and the mind becoming aware of the object, a kind of a dual perception. Later on, this may come together, and there is a passage of non-duality in our insight practice, usually not very long, and then it opens up towards the triality, when there is again the consciousness or mindfulness being aware of the object, but there is a general awareness being aware of this kind of process taking place all the time in our life. Object and becoming aware of it, that's our life. That's what we call our life. And the new discovery is that it is possible to become aware of the mind in the sense that we are not the doer or the thinker or the decider in our life, and we can see how these 5 elements of our being work together by itself, as that's the nature of them to work, and nobody is running the show. And this is a very high insight along the path of anatta, of not self, meaning this, that in the ultimate reality there is nobody running the show, and lots of freedom coming from this. But there are much more things to realize along the path, just indicating how breathtaking the insight meditation can get, and that it normally requires quite a protected environment, when we do not need to answer the phone when they are cooking for us, and we don't have any social life, we don't speak at all during this kind of training, perhaps with the teacher. And, you know, indicating that the mindfulness in this third area is really having the non-reactive quality indeed, and the detachment also is fully involved in that practice. There is no more reaction, because the mindfulness is catching all these tendencies in our mind to react blindly, automatically, and everything is becoming conscious, so that we can really be at the wheel, at the steering wheel of our life, and that it is not the ego with the tendencies of greed and hatred and delusion which is running our life, but it is the wisdom and the compassion which is the decisive factor, the leading quality of our life. So in this advanced practice, the mindfulness also was sometimes compared or translated as bare attention, indicating that at least in some passages of this practice, the mindfulness is really completely direct, perceiving the actuality without any interpretation by the perception. The thinking is limited very much as well, and there is just this presence with the things as they are, and this awareness is not so much concerned with the contents of the thoughts or of the mind, but rather with the structure, how it is happening, how our experience of life is actually happening. So there is even a shift in the focus of the awareness. And here it comes. Here it is the right place for application of mindfulness according to this sign. Allow whatever arises, because there is no danger, because you are already detached from the contents of your mind, be it the emotional movements or the thoughts contents, and you see it just happening. So here it is okay. I would probably not put it in the form of a sign, because really people can mistakenly take it into their everyday life, which would be disastrous. Behind this particular sign, perhaps it's even some mixing of practice with non-dual Mahayana, which has a completely different strategy. And the non-duality not distinguishing wholesome and unwholesome in the highest sense is a part of that path. But Mahayana is great teaching on its own, but don't mix it with another complete teachings which are using different path, different strategy. So these are the three areas of application of mindfulness. Now, rendering the sati as supervision, it's, I think, one of the best renderings, indicating to the crucial qualities of mindfulness in all these three areas. Supervisor, when we take it from the training of new therapists, so these students, of course, they are first getting the theoretical education, but later on they are also starting the practical work with the patients or with the group. But it, of course, needs at the beginning an experienced teacher or experienced therapist supervising the work of this new person, learning how to do it skillfully. And of course, in the beginning, the supervisor has to interfere quite often with that what's going on and correcting. So that would be the function of mindfulness in the first area. Later on, the supervisor is rather aware of that what is going on and interfering only when it's necessary. That would be the second area. And later, when the student is really improving and able to do individual therapy, so the supervisor is just sitting somewhere in the background and just watching. And perhaps after the session he's still telling what could be done better or like this. So this is actually quite good comparison to the function of mindfulness, and also to open up this bigger picture, to see the things in a larger perspective. So necessary not to be so glued to everything, and be able also to see the things in a larger context. I remember my childhood as a 4 or 5 years old, sitting in the window we were living at the first floor, and my nose was really touching the window pane quite often, because I liked so much to see the traffic going on and the people crossing the street and all that. And the child was watching that, having the nose on the window pane. So living like this, you cannot see the window in that situation. And actually this is similar for the advanced practice. When you are seeing the mind, that would be the window, or the consciousness, the screen of consciousness where our life is taking place, and seeing it from a healthy distance. If we go back to the simile with the television, watching the football game, the application of third type mindfulness to the football game would be to watch the switched on television set. Where the game is taking place. And the simile, okay, here is one simile for the final realization. It's again quite brutal simile. The butcher is taking off the hide of a cow completely, skillfully. And then he will put it back exactly as it was before. That's the simile. It looks exactly as before, but something crucial happened. Detachment. That's the teaching of Ajahn Chah, for example, in the forest tradition, and the teaching of all true teachers who are teaching the whole path of the Buddha. Let me finish this long talking. First, I will go a little bit over my notes. If I have forgotten something, well, I think I was dealing quite well with that. Here is one little parable for the second and third level of practice. Again, a simile from the ancient scriptures. The mind will be like the lotus leaf sitting on the surface of the lake, and when there is a raindrop falling on the leaf, it will just roll off. That's the simile for this advanced stage of practice, indicating that the mindfulness is also giving protection to our mind. And when adversary influences are coming at us, that they will not find a resonance in the purity of our heart. And these things will roll off of our mind without influencing it negatively. Beautiful simile. And in the modern days, the teachers usually speak about Teflon mind. Yeah, nothing burns on the Teflon pan. If there is no Teflon, so you have to scratch it after some burnings. But when there is a Teflon coat on that, it is easy to clean. So this simile. So in the end, let me sum up what I was talking about in this talk. I put it on a paper to give it more systematic place. Generally, mindfulness means careful, caring watchfulness, which should be applied sensitively, appropriately to the given situation. And this is the connection of sati in the scriptures with sampajanya. Quite often it is mentioned in this connection, meaning the appropriate application of mindfulness. The right mindfulness means mindfulness which is free of lobha, dosa, moha. That means free of greed, hatred, delusion. That's the hallmark of the right mindfulness. Now, in the first area of application, in our active everyday life, mindfulness watches over the quality and wholesomeness of our mind, developing positiveness, taking distance from evident unwholesomeness. And this also includes a gentle, meaningful restraint over the sensual input. In the second area of our life, which is mainly the time which we are with ourselves, the mindfulness holds the mind in wholesome presence, anchored in what is, here and now, preventing mental useless proliferation, which normally drains away our life energy into unprofitable fantasies, worries, and egocentric delusions. But the nose still touches the window. There may still be some identification with the mind. On the other side, the bigger picture of larger context of our existence starts already to open. This practice quite often has the quality to look behind the stage decorations, the stage properties, as the English people call it. Explaining it in the children theater, there are these stage decorations. It looks like a castle or a dragon cave, but if you look behind from the other side, you see that it was just painted on a cardboard. Now, coming to the third area of our Dharma life. During formal practice of insight meditation, the mindfulness is pure watchfulness, pure witnessing without being sucked into the story. The quality of supervision stands out in the characteristic of not being submerged in the content of experience, just seeing it happening. The noticing quality of that mindfulness can discern even the hidden moves of mind, discovering what was not clear before. The thoughts become just further object of awareness, seeing it appearing and dissolving. Now, also coming to the initial discussion with Professor Henking about writing letter mindfully. He actually thought to apply mindfulness of the first category, which is absolutely okay for that particular activity. But I was coming from intensive meditation. For me, the mindfulness meant pure witnessing, far beyond conceptualization, far beyond language. So, of course, we were right in our own way, but we were not clear about these different categories of application of mindfulness. Sometimes this advanced mindfulness was called bare attention, but such a definition can invoke incorrect understanding of that practice to be a bare meditation, to be a barren meditation. The designation bare attention is based on a passage in the scriptures when Buddha gives final instruction to Bahya, on account of which Bahya experiences sudden enlightenment. And it goes, In the seen, let's be only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only that what is sensed. In the thought, only that what is thought. Instead of bare attention, I would rather call it the direct perception of actuality as it really is. Finish by a story, old story. It was one of the first retreats in Switzerland with a teacher. Anagarika Munindra came to Switzerland. There was a small group. We had about 1 week, 10 days retreat. And Munindra was a teacher, Indian. You know, this very short person, beautifully smiling, very, very fresh one, beautiful person. And unlike the Burmese masters, you could address him really, you could reach him very easily. And so of course we were coming with our curiosity fully, and Munindra was open. And so we were asking him, Munindra ji, how is it the enlightenment? Please tell us, how is it to be enlightened? And Munindra shining, describing, yeah. When you practice the mindfulness really systematically, you must practice meditation systematically, and so the mindfulness will deepen and develop. Mindfulness will certainly deepen and develop. Develop will deepen, develop. And then suddenly it happens. Suddenly happens. You know, the enlightenment. That's like a new house, new beautiful house. And there is a table inside, and full of beautiful, delicious food on the table, full of food. And all the windows are open, and all the doors are open. There is a light in that house, but nobody home. So that's the description of enlightenment, the simile for enlightenment. So we can, I think, close with this. Again, let me repeat, in the Dharma, practicing Dharma, not neglecting any of these 3 different areas of practice, developing them parallelly to achieve real healing in many different ways, the psychological healing and especially the spiritual healing.